The Taiwan Strait is the most dangerous flashpoint on Earth right now. But what most analysts aren't telling you is how Beijing's rapid military modernization could turn a crisis into a full-blown war within hours. We've analyzed China's defense spending, strategic signaling, and US deterrence commitments. Here's why the next 12 months could decide everything. 100 miles of water separate China and Taiwan, but the political divide runs much deeper. The Taiwan Strait has become the crucible of US-China tensions because it represents irreconcilable strategic goals. Beijing insists Taiwan is a breakaway province that must eventually reunify, by force if necessary. Meanwhile, the US maintains deliberate ambiguity, arming Taiwan while stopping short of formal recognition, a policy designed to deter China without provoking outright conflict. Chinese military exercises tell a different story. In August 2022, live fire drills encircled Taiwan for days, simulating a blockade and showcasing Beijing's ability to isolate the island. These operations marked a shift. They occurred in response to a US congressional visit, not Taiwanese independence moves. According to CFR analysis, this signals a lower threshold for Chinese retaliation, with any perceived US interference now potentially triggering a response. Washington counters with its own demonstrations. Regular US naval transits through the strait reinforce freedom of navigation principles, but also serve as muscle flexing. Each passage risks miscalculation. Chinese jets have increasingly shadowed US ships, sometimes conducting unsafe intercepts. Historical precedent offers little comfort. The 1996 Taiwan Strait crisis saw China fire missiles near Taiwan during its elections, prompting a US carrier deployment that nearly escalated into open conflict. Economic ties complicate matters. China remains America's largest trading partner, with supply chains deeply intertwined. This interdependence creates competing pressures while businesses lobby against confrontation. Security experts warn economic leverage gives Beijing asymmetric advantages. Taiwan's semiconductor dominance adds another layer. Controlling 60% of global chip production makes the island both a prize and a vulnerability. The real danger lies in escalation speed. Unlike Cold War standoffs with predictable timelines, modern crises unfold at digital speeds. Cyber attacks could degrade Taiwanese defenses before conventional forces mobilize. Missile salvos might overwhelm defenses in minutes. Neither side appears willing to back down. China's military buildup continues unabated, while US arms sales to Taiwan set records annually. What makes the Taiwan Strait uniquely volatile is this combination of proximity, political will, and military capability. Unlike other flashpoints, the geographical constraints give commanders little reaction time. Radar systems on both sides track every movement, creating constant opportunities for misinterpretation. The 1996 crisis took weeks to unfold. Today's technologies could compress that timeline into hours, but military posturing alone doesn't tell the full story. China's official defense budget has grown for 28 consecutive years, reaching $230 billion in 2023. But this figure tells only part of the story. Independent analyses suggest actual military spending could be 40% higher when accounting for uncategorized allocations and provincial-level investments. The gap between reported and actual capabilities creates a dangerous blind spot for adversaries trying to assess China's true strength. Satellite imagery reveals the physical evidence of this hidden buildup. New naval facilities on Hainan Island can now harbor aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines simultaneously. These expansions align with China's stated goal of projecting power beyond its coastal waters. Research from SIPRI indicates China's naval shipbuilding capacity now exceeds America's by tonnage, a shift that occurred despite China's official budget remaining smaller than the Pentagon's. Hypersonic weapons development showcases this asymmetry. While China reported a 7.2% defense budget increase last year, its DF-17 missile program advanced at a pace that defies conventional spending patterns. The Texas National Security Review found China's military-civil fusion strategy allows dual-use technology funding to bypass traditional budget tracking. This means critical advancements in areas like missile guidance systems or satellite networks may not appear in official defense figures. The opacity extends to personnel. China's 2 million active-duty troops represent the world's largest standing army, but their modernization costs remain unclear. Western analysts frequently uncover new brigades equipped with advanced systems that weren't accounted for in previous assessments. For example, the rapid deployment of J-20 stealth fighters to frontline bases occurred without corresponding budget disclosures. What emerges is a military expanding faster than its own paperwork suggests. China's published budget growth of 7 to 8% annually likely underrepresents real capability gains by half, according to multiple defense economists. This disconnect matters because it affects strategic calculations both for regional neighbors and for US planners determining necessary force levels in the Pacific. The consequence is clear. China's military might already exceeds most public estimates. While official figures show gradual growth, observable assets demonstrate quantum leaps in quality and quantity. From shipyards launching destroyers at a record pace to airfields hosting next-generation drones, the physical evidence contradicts the modest annual increases Beijing reports. Yet, technology is another critical battleground. The US export controls on advanced semiconductors were meant to cripple China's technological ambitions. Yet Chinese foundries like SMIC are producing 7nm chips, a generation behind cutting edge, but far ahead of predicted timelines given the restrictions. This reveals a fundamental miscalculation. Blocking access to foreign chips has accelerated China's domestic production rather than stifled it. Analysis of trade flows shows the limits of unilateral export controls. While US bans cover advanced AI processors, Chinese firms are importing older generation equipment and reverse engineering the technology. SMIC's breakthrough 7nm process, achieved without EUV lithography machines, demonstrates how restrictions can spur workaround innovation. Researchers at the Center for Strategic and International Studies note this pattern mirrors China's past successes in sectors like solar panels and high-speed rail, initial dependency followed by rapid indigenization. Supply chains are adapting in unexpected ways. Semiconductor manufacturing is shifting to neutral hubs like Malaysia and Vietnam, where Chinese firms can access restricted components through third-party vendors. Over 20 new chip packaging plants have broken ground in Southeast Asia since the export controls took effect. This regional reshuffling complicates enforcement, as components can cross multiple borders before reaching final assembly in China. The broader impact reflects a strategic dilemma. By forcing decoupling, the US has inadvertently strengthened China's resolve to achieve self-sufficiency. Beijing has directed over $150 billion in state funding to domestic semiconductor research since 2021, 5 times its pre-restriction investment rate. Economic warfare tactics appear to be backfiring, creating a parallel tech ecosystem that could eventually compete globally. What emerges is a lesson in unintended consequences. Export controls work best when applied multilaterally, but with key producers like South Korea and the Netherlands resisting full alignment with US restrictions, gaps remain. China's chip progress, while still trailing leaders like TSMC, shows containment is imperfect. The technological gap may narrow faster due to the very measures designed to widen it. But the stakes go beyond technology. The South China Sea represents the starkest collision between law and power in modern geopolitics. Over $3 trillion in annual trade passes through these waters. But China's expansive territorial claims overlap with 6 other nations. Beijing has transformed obscure reefs into militarized islands, complete with runways and missile shelters. The 2016 Hague ruling under UN SLOs rejected these claims as unlawful, a decision China dismissed as null and void. Legal scholars note this defiance exposes a crucial tension. Maritime law relies on voluntary compliance, yet China's island-building campaign demonstrates how physical control can override legal judgments. Satellite imagery shows these artificial islands now host radars and anti-ship missiles, effectively changing facts on the water. Research from the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative confirms these outposts extend China's surveillance and strike capabilities far beyond its shoreline. The US response comes through freedom of navigation operations, challenging excessive maritime claims by sailing warships close to disputed features. Each transit risks confrontation. Chinese Coast Guard vessels regularly shadow US ships, sometimes coming dangerously close. Analysts at Rand Corporation argue these operations serve dual purposes, upholding international norms while testing China's reaction thresholds. What makes the South China Sea volatile isn't just competing claims, but incompatible approaches to resolving them. China favors bilateral negotiations where its size dominates, while smaller states seek multilateral arbitration. The Philippines' 2013 case against China at The Hague set a precedent. Yet Manila's subsequent hesitation to enforce the ruling shows the limits of legal victories without power to back them. Military developments further complicate the picture. China's Coast Guard, now the world's largest, operates like a paramilitary force, harassing fishing boats and blockading resupply missions to rival outposts. Meanwhile, US allies conduct joint patrols, creating a patchwork of competing patrols. The East-West Center studies reveal how these daily interactions establish de facto norms, gradually reshaping the strategic landscape. The lesson is clear: in contested waters, rulings alone can't enforce stability. China's incremental encroachment continues despite legal setbacks, proving that physical presence often trumps court decisions. With neither side willing to concede, the risk of accidental collisions or blockades grows. Legal frameworks provide talking points, but they don't remove the underlying drivers of conflict. Meanwhile, alliances are shifting. The Indo-Pacific has become the proving ground for a new kind of alliance warfare, one fought with trade deals as much as military pacts. Japan recently doubled its defense budget, acquiring Tomahawk missiles that can strike Chinese coastal targets. Australia hosts US bombers at Darwin Air Base, extending America's reach across Southeast Asia. These moves signal a regional shift that goes beyond symbolic partnerships. Joint military exercises reveal the depth of integration. The annual Malabar naval drills now include Japan, Australia, and India alongside US carriers, forming a de facto containment network. Research from the East Asia Forum shows these operations serve dual purposes, improving coordination while sending a visible deterrence signal. Smaller nations like the Philippines are granting expanded base access to US forces, reversing decades of non-alignment. China counters with economic statecraft. Its Belt and Road Initiative has lent $1 trillion to developing nations since 2013, creating dependencies that translate into political leverage. Sri Lanka's Hambantota port, seized after debt defaults, now hosts Chinese naval visits. Analysis from the Lowy Institute demonstrates how infrastructure loans come with soft power strings. Recipients often soften their stance on issues like Taiwan or the South China Sea. The competition creates tough choices for middle powers. South Korea walks a tightrope, expanding defense ties with Washington, while remaining China's largest trade partner. Vietnam hedges by buying Russian arms and US Coast Guard cutters simultaneously. These balancing acts reflect what scholars call omnidirectional diplomacy, trying to avoid outright alignment with either bloc. What's emerging is an alliance map drawn in economic and military ink. The US network relies on formal treaties and technology sharing, like the AUKUS nuclear submarine pact. China's influence stems from supply chain dominance and infrastructure debt traps. Both systems have vulnerabilities. Washington's partnerships require constant reassurance, while Beijing's creditors risk default and backlash. The race to lock in partners accelerates as tensions rise. Solomon Islands' security pact with China sparked regional alarm last year, showing how quickly loyalties can shift. Smaller states increasingly demand concrete benefits rather than abstract promises, whether US security guarantees or Chinese investment flows. Alliance politics will ultimately determine which side can project sustained power. Military superiority matters little without regional basing rights or overflight permissions. Economic clout fades if trading partners diversify. The coming years will test whether transactional partnerships can outlast ideological divides. But what happens if deterrence fails? A Chinese fighter jet crossed within 30 feet of a US reconnaissance plane last June, one of over 180 risky intercepts in the past 2 years. These near misses demonstrate how quickly routine patrols could spiral into crisis. Both militaries maintain strict rules of engagement, but accidents happen, especially when radar locks and warning flares become part of standard interactions. The Council on Foreign Relations war game scenarios reveal consistent patterns. Small incidents often escalate uncontrollably within 72 hours. In one simulation, a collision between Coast Guard vessels led to reciprocal ship sinkings, then airstrikes. The tipping point came when neither side could back down without losing face. Real-world conditions mirror this fragility. Commanders on both sides hold pre-delegated launch authorities for certain scenarios, compressing decision timelines. Cyber operations add another volatile layer. Chinese state-linked groups have already probed Taiwan's infrastructure, mapping power grids and communications networks. Unlike traditional military movements, cyber attacks offer plausible deniability until they don't. A 2023 attack on a Taiwanese bank was initially dismissed as criminal activity until forensic traces pointed to military hacking units. Such operations could precede invasion as a force multiplier, but their ambiguity makes proportional responses nearly impossible to calculate. Communication breakdowns compound the risk. Despite establishing crisis hotlines after past close calls, technical glitches and translation issues persist. During the 2001 EP-3 incident, when a Chinese jet collided with a US spy plane, delayed diplomatic contact nearly led to armed confrontation. Today's faster-paced battlespace leaves even less room for miscommunication. Some analysts argue the hotlines themselves create false confidence as they've never been tested during high-intensity crises. The escalation ladder has more slippery rungs than during the Cold War. Back then, nuclear doctrine created predictable pause points. Today's conflict spectrum runs from tweets to hypersonic missiles with no clear thresholds. China's non-war military activities doctrine intentionally blurs lines between peacetime operations and combat, gray zone tactics that resist easy classification or response. What makes the next year particularly dangerous is the convergence of military buildups with political timelines. Taiwan's upcoming elections, US presidential campaigning, and China's internal pressures create strong incentives for show-of-force posturing. Unlike the measured pace of Cold War crises, modern standoffs unfold at social media speed, where public outrage can outpace diplomatic channels. So, what can be done? War between the US and China isn't predetermined yet. The margin for error shrinks daily. Semiconductor shortages, disrupted shipping lanes, and fractured alliances would ripple across continents overnight. Taiwan remains the tinderbox, but the sparks could come from any friction point: a misinterpreted radar signal, a cyber attack traced incorrectly, or an economic sanction pushed too far. The next moves matter more than ever. Diplomatic channels need reinforcement alongside military deterrence. Economic decoupling requires careful calibration to avoid accelerating China's self-sufficiency. Allies demand consistent engagement, not just crisis appeals. This isn't just about two superpowers, it's about global order. What solution would you propose? Share your perspective.